What's up? I'm Shane, and guess what? You already know this. It's Christmas. Yes, it's the most wonderful time of the year. And I don't know about you, but when I was a kid, I had a picture of what the most wonderful time of the year should look like. I was born in Michigan, which is a pretty cold and sometimes snowy place, but when I turned 7, we moved to Arizona, which is the exact opposite of that. So I had an idea of what Christmas should look and feel like, right? Like snowy, you're warm and cozy by a fire with like tea or coffee. I didn't know as a kid what was in that mug, but it didn't matter. I just knew that it was supposed to have a certain vibe and a certain feel to it. But in Arizona, which is a desert, it went a little bit differently. See, there was no snow, and there was really no need for a fire. That picture-perfect idea of what many people think about when they think Christmas was entirely different. And if you live in a desert, or I don't know, maybe a hemisphere where it's summer and not winter, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Look, the truth is, you all probably have a story that's similar to mine. And I know we've all watched holiday movies that show that Christmas might not be all that it's cracked up to be. I mean, there's one thing about a change in scenery from Michigan to Arizona, but think about The Grinch. It's one of my favorite movies. I mean, sometimes it feels like Christmas is literally stolen. I mean, this guy had nothing he could do about his situation. I don't know what he was. This creature, I guess, this who, had no control over how Christmas would go. All he knew is that he heard something about an award, a check, maybe. But sometimes it's a little more serious. I mean, think about it. Maybe it was when you didn't get the gift that you really, desperately wanted. Or maybe it was when your family couldn't afford gifts at all. Maybe it was when someone you loved was missing from the table at Christmas time. Or maybe it was when someone showed up to the table that you wished hadn't been there. Maybe it was when you started to wonder if all of this Christmas magic that people tend to talk about all the time was really real. Or maybe it was when you started to feel less joy and excitement and more dread and anxiety about the Christmas season. Look, whatever the cause, at some point you've likely had the thought, is Christmas really all about the joy and the light and the love that everyone says it's about? Or is the stress and struggle and sadness that sometimes surrounds the season, is all of that here to stay? Look, I've been there too, and that's why I think the best way to solve our Christmas dilemma is to go back to the beginning, to take a fresh look at that very first Christmas to understand what the season really means to us. To see that the hero of our story didn't drop from heaven like some superhero or magical figure. To discover that the real story of Christmas is about, well, a kid. Now, before we get to that kid, let's do a quick deep dive into the actual Christmas story that we read about every year, especially here at church. What do we actually know about that first Christmas? Of course, none of us was there, so we have to look back. We have to rely on ancient stories about what things were like at the time, some of which we find in the pages of Scripture. 2 people gave us specific details about this kid and about that first Christmas. Matthew, one of Jesus' disciples, and Luke, who was a doctor turned journalist and biographer on Jesus' life. Luke's account is the most detailed, so it's the one that we'll start with today. Since even Luke wasn't around for Jesus' birth, he probably got his information from someone who was. Many believe he likely interviewed Jesus' mother, Mary, when doing his research. How cool is that? Let's just take a look at his account. In those days, a decree went out from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be registered. This was the first registration and was taken while Quirinius was governor of Syria. All went to their own towns to be registered. Joseph also went from the town of Nazareth in Galilee to Judea to the city of David called Bethlehem, because he was descended from the house and family of David. He went to be registered with Mary, to whom he was engaged and who was expecting a child. While they were there, the time came for her to deliver her child, and she gave birth to her firstborn son and wrapped him in bands of cloth and laid him in a manger, because there was no place in the guest room. With Luke's words in mind, let's start with what the scripture actually tells us about that first Christmas. Joseph and Mary were engaged. Mary was pregnant. They left Nazareth to go to Bethlehem for a census, which is a count of people in a specific region, or it's just that registration that Luke was talking about. And while they were in Bethlehem, Mary delivered a baby. He was laid in a manger because the place that they were staying was also a place where animals stayed. So there's just like 5 key details. So far, so good, right? This sort of adds up to the image that most of us probably have when we think about that first Christmas. But it's a lot less dramatic than we might have imagined. This isn't Mary and Joseph running in at the last minute like the McAllister family running through the airport in Home Alone. They weren't riding in on a donkey like the cartoon drawings show us. They weren't dealing with an evil innkeeper turning them away like a villain in a Marvel movie. No. That picture, it's actually kind of in our imagination. That picture in our imagination of a desperate Joseph running and looking for a room to rent right before Jesus arrived, that story is probably a little more dramatic than what historically took place. In fact, it's far more likely that Mary and Joseph had been in Bethlehem for several days or weeks and were staying in the front room of a relative's house where animals came in on cold nights. So maybe it's also more likely that Jesus' birth was a lot more normal than we thought. Nothing is uniquely tragic or traumatic. Nothing is particularly exciting or magical. There's a good chance that that's how it was. It seems like God took care of every detail, and maybe that's the real miracle to remember. The miracle of Christmas is not that Jesus was born in a barn because that's all Joseph was able to find. The miracle of Christmas is not a baby arriving in an unexpected place. The miracle of Christmas is not about the animals or the setting or even the other people there. The miracle of Christmas is simply Jesus. The miracle is God in human flesh in the form of a baby, the one who arrived to save us. Christmas is about the kid who changed everything. That first Christmas wasn't all magical and miracles the entire time. There was a lot of magic and it was incredibly miraculous, but it was more than that. It was in some ways simpler than that. In fact, as we read, it was pretty ordinary stuff for the most part. And I think that's incredibly important for us to remember today. Mary and Joseph, they were 2 regular people engaged to be married. Mary was a young woman unexpectedly about to become a mother, and Joseph was a carpenter working to support his young family. Jesus' hometown of Nazareth, it was so obscure that it didn't even show up on any maps before the 1st century. It was very small, maybe as small as 35 houses and around 100 people. It wasn't highly regarded, even by other Jewish people in the area. One of Jesus' own followers asked, "Can anything good come from Nazareth?" And that's the place where Jesus would have grown up. The start of Jesus' life was far more ordinary than we might think. Not just the Christmas moment where he's born, but even his childhood. But I actually think that's good news, because it reminds us that not everything about the holiday season has to be magical and meaningful all the time. When things aren't going the way we thought, when the holidays aren't all that fun for us, when Christmas doesn't bring us the joy that we thought it was supposed to, that's okay. Because the heart of Christmas isn't really about all of that stuff. It's about the kid who had 2 ordinary parents, the kid whose family didn't have a whole lot, the kid who came from the middle of nowhere, the kid who showed up in a place that nobody expected. Jesus, the kid who came to save us. Christmas is about the kid who changed everything. The birth of Jesus is extraordinary. Yes, please hear me say that. That is so important. There are so many extraordinary things. The idea of God putting on a human body and coming to live with us as a baby, that's extraordinary. But I don't want you to miss this Christmas. It's also pretty ordinary. And honestly, that might be the best news for us today, because it means that in our most ordinary moments, we can still find Jesus. We can remember that Christmas is about the kid who changed everything. And here's how I think we can start to do this Christmas season. First, be real about what you're feeling this holiday season. Instead of believing that Christmas has to be this big, magical experience or acting like your holidays are exactly what you hope they'd be, just be real about what you're feeling this Christmas. Talk to God about what's going well and be honest with God about what's not. When it comes to Christmas, be real about how it feels this year. And then second, embrace the ordinary. Remember, when he was born, Jesus was an ordinary kid, born to ordinary parents, and then grew up in a pretty ordinary place. And look how his life it turned out. I'd say today that Jesus is anything but ordinary. So don't count out what God can do with your ordinary moments. The days when it feels like nothing good happens, the moments where the magic of Christmas is hard to find, the seasons where life doesn't feel all that exciting, God can and will do something extraordinary in the ordinary. That's what happened with Jesus, and that's what Christmas is all about. Remember, Christmas is about the kid who changed everything. And my prayer for all of us this holiday season is that we'd come to know that kid in a new way. Maybe for some of you, this will be the first year that you really get to know Jesus. Maybe it's the first step into a relationship with him, or maybe it's a new way to think about and experience the relationship that you already have with Jesus. Look, whatever it is, I hope we'll all remember the ordinary details of that first Christmas. And I hope we'll remember how those details connect to our lives in an extraordinary way. When you head to group, I want you to be thinking about your answer to this question. What's one ordinary thing you love about the Christmas story?